Turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 12 today. John 12. This is right after Lazarus is raised from the dead. A lot of buzz going around about Jesus and his ministry that was already going on, and now you can imagine escalated after this amazing, very public raising of Lazarus, who was his close friend, along with the sisters of Lazarus, Mary and Martha, close friends of Jesus, with whom he hung out quite often, actually. And so here we are in chapter 12. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. They gave a dinner for him. They gave a dinner for Jesus, in other words. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard and anointed Jesus' feet, wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept a common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." Motives are important, aren't they? I think we have a tale of two different motives here. We have the motivation of Mary, driven by thankfulness to Jesus for raising her brother, by adoration and honor. And of course we have Judas, whose motivation sounds good. I mean, it sounds nice what he said. It was actually a very spiritual sounding thing that he said, but his internal motivation was off. It's kind of an opposite thing. What Mary does looks reckless and wrong, but the motivation is right. What Judas says sounds right and good and righteous, but the motivation is wrong. You have this really strange mixture going on here, and Jesus speaks to it directly and clears it up. It reminds me, my wife shared this joke with me. We were on our way to see our son and just to hang out with him for his birthday. And she's reading, I said, "Just read me something funny." And so she's reading, I think, a Reader's Digest, which we haven't read in forever, but she got a copy of one. And this great joke, it says, there was this strict Catholic school, elementary school, and the kids were told they have surprises waiting for them at lunch. And one of the headmasters of this little Catholic school had fresh apples from her apple tree. And so she put them on a big platter, and there was a note attached that said, "Take only one, God is watching." And down at the other end of the table, though, was the dessert cookies, the big pile of cookies. And some kid had scribbled in his handwriting, "Take all you want, God is watching the apple." I think that's the motivation issue, maybe, that we're dealing with. Jesus had just raised Lazarus. Lazarus' sister, one of his closest disciples, worshipped him in this very unusual way. And another close disciple, who technically was in his inner circle, Judas, resents it. For what he says are righteous reasons, but what turns out to be selfish reasons. Our motivations are important, aren't they? I have to say that one of the biggest struggles that maybe we all have, certainly I have, is what is motivating this? I get upset at things like you do. I get aggravated at things like you do. I'm sure. I get excited about certain things as you do. And often in hindsight, I have to look back and go, what motivated that? Why was I so excited about that? Or why was I so angry about that? Did it have to do with some righteous cause or righteous thing or good thing? Or was it just about me? Was it just about me getting my way or getting what I want or seeking revenge maybe or whatever it is? What motivates me? And that might be one of the bigger struggles we have as human beings, certainly even as Christians, because we know the language, like Judas, we know the language well, right? We can, and I've heard a lot of it, and you have too, I'm sure. I've heard too much of it in recent days, where people who know the language of Christianity, even ministers, some of them, use that language in ways that maybe don't come across, or you walk away going, was he really doing that out of righteous motivation, or was there a catch to it? What was he selling? What was he pushing? What was he promoting, or she? Those are the things that trouble me the most, not only in others, but in my own life. What's my motivation here? And it's funny to me that both of these people, Mary and Judas, had walked very closely with Jesus for his whole ministry. I mean, face to face with him. They had seen the miracles. They had both seen them. They had both heard all the teaching. They were there for all the teachings of Jesus. And yet they come out of this thing with a very different approach to what it means to be a Christian. That tells me, I think, that it's easy for self-centered, selfish motivation to creep in and to begin to pull us away from the ways of Christ. But it also tells me, here's the good news of it, that it is possible to walk with Jesus and to lavishly worship him and to sacrifice all or important things on his behalf out of pure motive, as Mary does. And when we do that, it may look weird to the world or may look weird to those around us, but it's actually something that Jesus looks at and says, that's a good thing. That's good. You're doing well. You're doing that right, which is what he says to Mary. And then, of course, turns to Judas, who should know better, and says, leave her alone. Stop bugging her. Stop saying that stuff. You don't mean it, first of all. And secondly, you're missing the point. Well, I don't want to miss the point. And so I think our motivation is better or more pure, first of all, when it begins out of worship and gratefulness toward Jesus. Don't you? I think when my motives start with, God, I want to just show my gratefulness to you. I want to be loyal to your ways. I want to act like you. I want your ways to win. Then chances are the results of that motivation are going to be proper. That motivation is going to be proper, right? In other words, if my focus turns away from my own control and says, Jesus, my actions today are about giving you supremacy and control, then chances are my motivation is going to be right. Mary's motivation was gratefulness, thanksgiving. And so she does this lavish, still very public thing that could have been looked at and was by Judas as just some kind of wasteful, attention-seeking thing. But Jesus gauged it based on her motivation. Her motivation was gratefulness. It was worship. It was recognizing who Jesus is and elevating that. On the other hand, right? We always have to get to Judas. On the other hand, Judas's good-sounding motivation becomes actually treacherous and evil and bad. Because his motivation was not what he said. It was put more money in the thing so I can get more for myself, right? That was his motivation. Let me get more for me. Let me elevate myself. Let me protect myself. And, whatever it costs anyone else, fine. But let me do this. And in order to mask that, though, I'll say the righteous sounding thing. It is so easy to do that for all of us in this room because we've been around the church our whole lives. I'm good at church language. So are you. Heck, I know politicians who are good at church language. I know preachers who are good at church language. And I want to be one of those followers of Christ who is not only good at the church language, but uses it properly, right? And it's a warning to us, I think, about motivation, about using it properly. We find opportunities to give thanks. We find opportunities to exalt Christ. And we let our actions flow from that. I think that's the bottom line here. Mary had this very valuable, very expensive, very nice stuff that she could have sold for profit. She could have kept for herself. She could have done all kinds of things with. And instead she sacrifices it as an offering to Jesus, as a way of exalting him, right? This beautiful act of thanksgiving and sacrifice and service to Jesus. That's her motivation. And though it looked reckless, it actually was good. Again, on the other hand, Judas sees this and his immediate response is not, yay, she's worshiping Jesus, but she's taking something from me. And my needs, my wants, my desires are more important than anything else. I think that's what gets us into trouble, don't you? I think that's the motivation factor. And I think self-serving versus serving Jesus is the line. Final thing is this. I think beyond when our actions then flow from good motivation, positive, Christ-centered motivation, then the results are actually multiplied by God himself. I really believe that. I think that one act, there's another scene in another gospel that records it, and Jesus says the same thing, like, leave her alone. And the other gospel says, every time this story is told, she'll be mentioned. In other words, people will remember this from now on. You may not think it's a big deal. You may think it's even wasteful, but from every time my story is told, she's going to be mentioned. So here's this one little act out of the middle of nowhere that it seems odd and weird, but it's motivated by thanksgiving and worship and praise of Christ. And Jesus says, this will, we'd say, we'd say that the press room, this has wings. In other words, this is going to take off. Like, people are going to hear this a lot. And Jesus says, this will have wings. This will take off because it's motivated out of the worship of me. And even though it seems like a simple act or even a wasteful act, it'll multiply. Its effectiveness will multiply. It will become a teacher for generations, which it has, right? We're talking about it today. So I take some solace in that Jesus will take that well-motivated, Christ-centered action, even though it seems little, even though it seems like no big deal to others, and even if it seems weird to others, Jesus will take it and multiply it. Use it over and over again. Plant a seed in someone's life that will multiply. Think of those things in your own life, those people in your own life who did these little acts of service. And I've mentioned this one before, probably, but I was thinking about it as my dad and mom's anniversary just rolled around yesterday. It's the first anniversary, of course, of my dad without my mom. Talking to him a little bit yesterday about that. I thought of a little act that he did. I mentioned this to you before, but the first time I ever served communion as a pastor, it was in the early 1990s in my first senior pastorate, a little church in Dallas. My parents had come over, and they eventually joined that church. They came over 30 miles from there, and they came over to see it, to be a part of it. And it was a smaller church, so we distributed communion on that day. We didn't have people come before. We distributed it, And we were preparing it, and we didn't know how many to prepare for because I was new. You never know. And it turns out a lot of people came that day, which was good. I mean, they were just curious about the new pastor probably or something. I don't know, but they came. I mean, whatever the reason, there were more people there than we thought. And the whole service, I was thinking, man, I hope we prepared enough for. You don't want to not have enough for communion ever. It's just a bad thing. I mean, I knew enough to know that, even though I didn't know much. I knew that was bad. And so I was still in seminary, going to seminary at night, and blah blah blah. Anyway, so I'm we're working, music's pretty good, and things are coming together. Preach, and we're getting ready for the communion time. I'm just doing the math in my head. I hate to say I'm distracted the whole service, just thinking, oh, it's going to be close, and I can't signal anybody. For some reason, I just didn't go bring some more bread or whatever. I just didn't think to do that. I was just new. And so we need ushers to come and help. My dad stepped up to help. He grabbed, the tray over this side, and the gentleman in the church grabbed a tray over this side. And we had very much like this center aisle kind of thing, a little bit further back. And so they move up and down the aisle and distribute everything. They walk back, and I haven't, been served yet. And I've got to lead the thing, and I see this tray empty, and I see this tray. There is two cups left, and one piece of bread left. This one, and my dad. So I look at my dad like, hey, it's okay. I mean, what are we gonna do? He takes the bread, he hands it to me, hands me the cup, takes his cup, pretends to take bread. And I'm just like, I don't know how to respond to that. There's no class in seminary that teaches you that. You don't know how to respond to faking the bread. You don't know how to do that. But my dad is doing it as this act of love, and doesn't want his son to be embarrassed as first. He's showing like, hey, and he just winks at me, and I'm about to walk over and try to. He just quietly stop. Just it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. So I look at him. I go back up front. I say the things that we say. I have trouble getting through it. This is my body, given as a sacrifice for you. I just saw some of that up close and personal. It's a weird, strange, unusual sacrifice that I have no theological explanation for, except for that it's motivated out of love. And I believe Jesus liked it. I think he was honored by it. And I think that communion to this day might be what it is. It's not the only, but it might be it is among, certainly for me, the top 3 or 4 remembered communions I ever had. Right? Not because it was my first, but because of the act of just love and care. No big deal. Really, in the eyes of others. I mean, and I can only tell this story in church because non-church people won't even like, what's the big deal, right? Well, it's a big deal. And it was an even bigger deal when my father just, for the love of his son, and didn't want to embarrass him, just went, it's okay. I'll go without the bread. Well, guess what, guys? The bread was there. Just in a different way. And we partook, and it was all done. And I'm forever grateful. And I don't tell the story much, ever, and that was a long time ago, 28 years ago now. Good Lord, I'm old. Anyway, 28 years ago now, and I remember it like it was yesterday, because there was this act of love. And when my sons, and I have great stories about them too later on for you, but when my sons got old enough where they were ready to sort of take their first communion, I ended up eventually telling them that story. because I wanted them to know about communion, yes, what the bread means and what the cup means. But I wanted them to see something that transcended even the bread and the cup. It is the love of Christ that pervades our lives at all times. And so Judas missed it, and I'm sorry that Judas missed it because, because he sacrificed that eternal blessing for short-term gain. And that's the final part. Jesus says, leave her alone. She's doing something that I guess you don't understand. I'm paraphrasing, right? You don't get it because her motivation is different than yours. And so you can't understand it unless you change your motivation. Who are my choices serving? Whether it's in voting or giving or working in the church or something at work, who are my choices serving? Who are they exalting? Who are they benefiting? I think that's the question. I can fool myself as Judas did with deceptive words, but in the end, there's only one thing that's eternal, and that's the ways of Christ. And that which is motivated by Christ will stay. David Foster Walter said, truth will set you free, but not until it's finished with you. And I think Judas experienced that. Judas was never allowed the truth to be finished with him so that he could really be free, and Mary did. I'll just close with this. Unfortunately, in this beautiful passage, verse 8, you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me, has been taken to somehow mean that helping the poor is not as important. That has never, ever been what it means. Here's really what it means. Two things. First, it was a way of looking at Judas and saying, I know your motivation. I really know. It was kind of this almost secretive kind of thing with Judas, like, I know why you are saying what you're saying, and I won't applaud it because it's not right. And the second thing is this, that there was, that I think he was saying, look, if you really cared about the poor, like you say, there's plenty of opportunity out there. You don't have to trample on her act of worship to get that done. In other words, where's your heart, Judas? Where's your heart? Let me show you someone who's doing it right, even though it looks weird. And then we get to see, sadly, through Judas, someone who sounds right, but is really doing it wrong. I'll close by saying you can get a long, long way, sadly, in this world by saying the right things but doing it wrong. In other words, Judas Iscariot would get a lot of votes. I hate to say that way. I mean, I'm not making fun of any part, but Judas Iscariot would get a lot of votes because he said the right things and nobody stopped long enough to question the motivation, right? But Mary is the one whom Jesus applauds, not Judas. That gets my attention. You can get a long way doing the right things, or doing the right, or saying the right sounding things with the bad motivation. You get a long way in this world. But in the kingdom of God, it is those whose motivation is Christ-centered, love-centered, even if their actions are a little out of the way, a little hard to understand, a little hard to get votes with. It is those folks that Jesus looks at. One of my mentors once said, Charles, just always remember, and I haven't always kept this well, I'll admit, but it keeps me grounded at least. He said, it's better if the whole crowd, or it's bad if the whole crowd is cheering and Jesus is sitting there silent. It's better if the whole crowd is silent and Jesus is standing and cheering.
you have to choose between the two, choose the second. I think that's what Mary did. I think that's what the church is called to do every day. Jesus, what makes you cheer? Even if the crowd doesn't understand it. Let's live that way. Stand with me if you will.